We found that Australians' feeling of safety is actually the lowest it's been in our history of polling. So in 11 years, there's only 1 in 4 Australians actually feel very safe, which is down from 42% a few years ago. So yes, that threat of terrorism appears to be really driving home. We put a list of 8 sort of potential security risks to Australians and asked them what was making them feel insecure in the next 10 years. And terrorism ranked first, second and third in that list of 8, whereas risks of conflict in our region were far lower in terms of the threat.
That's right. And allied to that, we have some very interesting responses when you put to the respondents what they felt about Australia's involvement in Iraq.
Yes, it is interesting. So, there's this feeling of insecurity, and then we asked them, whether they actually supported Australia's military engagement in Iraq, and we put to them airstrikes and providing training and support to Iraqi security forces. And it was a very, very solid 69% of Australians supported that military engagement, despite the fact that they acknowledged that this may increase the risk of terrorism to Australia. So there were a majority who said that this action will increase the risk of terrorism to Australia now, and only 20% said it would make Australia safer from terrorism in the future. So that's quite a sophisticated set of responses, is that they're feeling threatened. They know that military action in Iraq may well increase the risk of terrorism to Australia, and yet they support that action.
Climate change, a very big issue, has been in the headlines of late, of course, with the Prime Minister's comments on wind farms. We have this very important conference coming up, Alex, at the end of the year to set new greenhouse gas emissions targets. What did people reckon about that, and where Australia should be going on its energy consumption front?
Yeah, well, this is one of the most interesting long-term trends that we now have from our more than decade of polling. A concern about climate change dropped between 2006 and 12, but for the last 3 years, concern again has been rising very steadily. So we've got the highest level of concern about climate change that we've seen in about 8 years now. And in the lead up to those climate change negotiations at the end of the year, 63% of Australians think that the government should actually make significant commitments on emissions reductions now rather than wait for the action of other countries. So that accords almost exactly with the question that we asked last year, which is whether we should take a leadership position or wait for an international consensus. So we were very specific this year. We tried to use the terms that the government is phrasing their approach to these negotiations in. And Australians actually disagree that we should not make significant commitments ahead of other countries. Actually, they want Australia to get ahead and encourage other countries to do the same thing on emissions reduction. So that was a pretty clear signal to government about how Australians want it to act in the upcoming climate negotiations in Paris.
And finally, Alex, you put to the respondents in this survey some names or pictures of world leaders, particularly regional leaders, and a bit of a worrying result on some recognition of very important people in the region.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We put Australians a list of 10 world leaders, ranging from Barack Obama, who of course almost everybody knows, to leaders in our region, Narendra Modi, the new Indian Prime Minister, Jokowi, so the new Indonesian Prime Minister and President, and sometimes the recognition of those just by name was pretty low, sort of in the high 60s for India's Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister. And Jokowi was not known by 42% of Australians, which was quite high considering what's happened this year in the Indonesia relationship. But they've got some very clear views about some of the other leaders. For example, Putin elicits a very strong response, and more than 60% of Australians don't admire Vladimir Putin. So they're pretty clear about some of the leaders.